Welcome back to another episode of Rock Boys Football. Matt Rhule, the Nebraska Cornhuskers, getting a lot of buzz going into 2025. And look, the national media will get up here and say, hey, year three teams under Matt Rhule historically take that step. And that is, look, very accurate. You can't argue with the history behind that claim. The reason to be optimistic about this Nebraska program is not only year three under Matt Rhule. It's because they've made some really good additions and changes to this program going into 2025. And it kind of feels like Matt Rhule has settled in to this Nebraska program, right? You got your quarterback that you know you can win at a very high level with. I think more notably, you got an offensive coordinator that's coming in that can maximize a very talented quarterback. There are things that I think are really pushing Nebraska in the right direction going into 2025. Five reasons that Nebraska can kind of take that elusive next step as a program under Matt Rhule. Want to get into it before we do, and as always, one, just massive shout out to the Nebraska fans. It is a fan base that has shown a lot of love to the boys over the last couple of years. We've had a blast talking about it. The amount of support y'all continue to show means the absolute world. If you guys do enjoy the content, consider subscribing to the channel. Much more importantly, yeah, I came up with, five reasons. If I'm missing any reasons to be optimistic about this Nebraska team, let it fly in the comment section. Appreciate you guys. Without further ado, let's get into one. And a lot of the first reason that a lot of people will talk about the optimism around this Nebraska team is the year two bump that you're going to see Dylan Raiola take. And like, you're going to see it. Quarterbacks historically get better year after year, especially when you're a freshman going into your sophomore year. That was a 2024 season where Dylan was getting his feet wet. He showed that he can go out and win you some football games. Now it's about kind of finding that consistency. And we're going to talk about Dylan and the next steps that he needs to take. But I want to start with the Dana Holgorsen impact. And it's not only on quarterback Dylan Raiola. Look, I think Dana is a great quarterback developer. I think more importantly, he's a much better play caller than Coach Satterfield. Let's talk about the larger impact on this Nebraska offense, and that's the pass catchers too. People don't like to talk about this because it's all the quarterbacks that Dana Holgorsen has worked with, which kind of takes up a lot of the conversation. Dana Holgorsen has done a phenomenal job developing wide receivers too. Guys like Michael Crabtree, guys like Justin Blackman at Oklahoma State. You go back and look at Dana Holgorsen's career, not only developing quarterbacks at a high level, developing pass catchers at a high level too. That's kind of plagued Nebraska a little bit. Quarterback play obviously has not been good enough historically. I would argue as well just that not enough playmaking ability from the pass catchers. Well, guess what? You've done two things that I think can kind of fix that problem. One, you've made some really good additions to this roster, most notably Dane Key. Don't sleep on true freshman Cortez Mills either. And now you're bringing Dana Holgorsen and a guy like the Keel Shorts to come and develop these wide receivers. That's the combination that you're looking for if you're a Nebraska fan. Secondly, the development that we have to see from Dylan. Look, Dylan, as a true freshman, incredibly impressive in the Big Ten, going up against some really good defenses week in, week out, right? How does he take that next step? We know that the arm talent is there. And I would even go and argue that between the years, like this kid is wise beyond his years at the quarterback spot. The one spot where I would really like to see Dylan take that step in 2025 is becoming a little bit more of a difference maker athlete as a quarterback. And look, we know Dylan's not going to be Lamar Jackson. He's just Lamar Jackson's a different caliber athlete, and that's okay. Dylan is a very solid athlete who has a very big body that is hard to bring down. The next step for me here is Dylan not only not taking as many negative plays, but being able to get outside the pocket and extend plays. You look at a prerequisite that we're seeing in football in terms of elite quarterback play. You have to have at least a semblance of playing off script and extending plays. Even going to the NFL ranks a guy like Patrick Mahomes. Look, Pat Mahomes ain't an elite athlete, but he's really, really crafty at extending plays and being a difference maker. Dylan was really solid as a true freshman. In fact, it's really one of the more impressive freshman quarterback seasons that we've seen. Can he take that step and be a difference maker for this Nebraska offense? That's what I'm looking for from Dylan going into 2025. Number two, and don't sleep on this. This is, to me, the deepest offensive line Matt Rhule has had since he's gotten there to Lincoln, Nebraska. Why does this matter? It matters for a couple of different reasons. One, if you want to be an elite team in the college football landscape, you need depth along the lines of scrimmage. And Matt Rhule knows that more than anybody. The minute he got to Lincoln, Nebraska, he's been using the transfer portal, he's been using the high school recruiting ranks, and just getting depth. Filling this roster up with power forward caliber bodies on the offensive line. And I'm looking at this offensive line going into the 2025 year. Not only do you have some veteran guys that you feel really good about. Rocco Spindler, guy that has played a lot of football coming over from Notre Dame. Elijah Pritchett started every single game at tackle in the SEC. I think Elijah Pritchett, it was not great in 2024, right? I'm not getting up here and saying Elijah Pritchett's an elite offensive tackle. He very well could be with the traits that he possesses. Justin Evans has been about as solid as it comes on the inside of the offensive line. Why is it so important to be deep? One, because if you want to win, we want to play good football throughout 4 months of a college football season, your chances are you're going to have to mix and match your offensive line. It's very hard to get through a full season with the same starting five. More importantly, in spring practice and fall camp, when you are deep on the offensive line with a lot of versatile, capable bodies, it becomes a lot easier to create a starting five that's really, really good. And I look at my projected starting five right now. Look, it could look a lot different come week one for Nebraska. Talk about a guy like Grant Bricks. Talk about a guy like Preston, guys that are blue chip guys that very well could push for starting opportunities. That's how you want it to look. And it just didn't look like that the first 2 years when Matt Rhule got there. There were times throughout the first 2 seasons of Matt Rhule where you just had to play guys that you knew weren't good enough. I don't think you're in that situation for Nebraska up front going into 2025. Number 3 is probably the most talent that you've had around the quarterback since Matt Rhule's been there too. Obviously, we think Dylan's going to take a step. I think everybody thinks that. Ja'Cory Barney going into year 2, Dane Key being a top 5 wide receiver in the Big Ten, at least in my opinion, going in to the 2025 year. Isaiah Hunter coming from Cal. True freshman Cortez Mills, who I really do think will play a role for Nebraska in the 2025 year. Carter Nelson potentially being just a legit difference maker at the tight end position. The one question mark that I have that some Nebraska fans, some Nebraska fans might disagree with this, and it's okay to it's February 20th. We're going to disagree on some things. Is Nebraska good enough in the running back room? Look, Dana Holgorsen and this Nebraska team fought for Emmett Johnson to stay, right? He briefly hit the transfer portal. I think Nebraska fought like heck to keep him around. That tells me Dana likes what he sees with Emmett Johnson. I think Emmett Johnson's solid. Jamarian Parker is a guy that I'm very excited to see what he can be as a true freshman. I don't think the running backs were good enough last year. The problems with Nebraska running the football, and you all have heard me say this, I think it had a lot more to do with just not having difference makers at the running back position. I thought this Nebraska offensive line was actually moving bodies off the line of scrimmage. Can you find that run game in the 2025 years? Probably that biggest question for me with Nebraska going into 2025. Going over to the defensive side of the football, there's really one thing that I look at and really excites me. Look, you got some questions, right? There's no way around the conversation that the depth on the defensive line, specifically on the inside, that is a question mark. You have to replace one really, really 2 good football players in Ty and Nash. What do the 2s and 3s look like? And that's a position that you've seen get Nebraska in trouble in the past, right? Think about that Illinois game. I think it was the end of September, the 4th quarter, where Nebraska, for lack of better terms, kind of fell apart on defense. I think a large part had to do with just playing guys like Ty and Nash way too much. You didn't have the depth on the defensive line. Is that good enough going into 2025? It's probably the biggest question mark that I have. Now, if there's a reason to believe in this Nebraska defense, it's the team speed. And this is something we talk about in the summer months all the time for Nebraska. Look, Matt Rhule wants his team to he simplifies the sport, man. Matt Rhule is not a over complicating the sport of football kind of guy. Bigger, faster, stronger players are going to lead to better football teams. And what he's done on the high school recruiting trail is just we are going to stack as much speed as we can on the defensive side of the football, specifically at this linebacker position. Vincent Shavers. Deshaun McCullough is one of the better athletes at linebacker that you'll see. I'm really interested to see what they do with Deshaun McCullough because there's a couple different positions he can play. What I guess I'm trying to say here is go back to the first 2 years, some really solid Nebraska defenses that got into some trouble when they played some teams that had some real good team speed. These linebackers, much more athletic than Nebraska had the first 2 years. And that's not a shot at guys like John Bullock, who were very, very solid for Nebraska, but you're getting athletic, much more athletic in the back end of this defense. And I'd even have this conversation with the safeties and nickels too. I mean, you look at a guy like Malcolm Hartzog, I think he'll play for Nebraska. You saw at times, one, he was playing out of position. Two, he's just a shorter, slower football player. You are starting to see Nebraska stack just some size and speed in the back end. And if you want to take that jump into the upper echelon of the Big Ten, bang with teams like Ohio State, bang with teams like Oregon, you need the guys, you need the team speed in the back end, because Oregon and Ohio State are going to be really fast teams. You got to have the speed to match it. Nebraska is getting there on the defensive side of the football. And number 5, look, year 3 bump. I'm not going to ignore it. I just don't like the fact that anybody wants to talk about Nebraska taking the step, they just say it's year 3 under Matt Rhule blindly. That's not the only reason this team's better in 2025, but it's a driving force. Make no mistake about it. I mean, you look at one historically, the data, and I ain't much of a data guy, but the data tells us year 3 is a good year for Nebraska or Matt Rhule coach football teams. More importantly, why is that the case? Matt Rhule gets the roster and the culture the way he wants. It's kind of a two-prong approach here. One, we got to get the players that match what we want to do. That takes time in college football. You can't just snap your fingers and get the roster you want. Now, you can do it quicker than most because the transfer portal is now available, but it takes a couple of cycles and a couple of years to get the roster the way you want. Just as importantly, getting the culture the way you want. Matt Rhule comes in, there will just be guys that do not vibe with the Matt Rhule style, and that's okay. Best of luck at the other program. It normally takes maybe a year or two to kind of, for lack of better terms, weed some of those players out. The roster, I think, is getting to where Matt Rhule wants it. Just as importantly, I think the culture is getting the way Matt Rhule wants it as well. And you talk about significant culture changes going from Coach Frost to Matt Rhule, it was there. Look, there's a lot of reasons to be optimistic about this Nebraska football team taking that jump. I think we're all excited to see what 2025 has in store. And I think we're really excited for spring practice because, look, there's a lot of new faces, a lot of new coaches coming into this program, a lot of storylines, a lot of moving parts that we're going to see over the next couple of weeks and months. Appreciate you guys rocking with it. If y'all do enjoy the content, consider subscribing to the channel, and we'll talk to y'all later. Peace.